Well, as you probably know, there are times I like to focus on a particular word that comes to us out of the New Testament, and a word that Jesus spoke, or words that were written on behalf of the history and ministry of Jesus. And then these words that came to the early church as they were trying to figure out who they were and how they might be able to faithfully respond to the call to discipleship. And the term children struck my attention, particularly after I'd finished thinking through with you, at least in part, what the messages of Jesus were to not only those who were listening to him and the disciples during the Beatitudes. But now these words come to my mind as we think about the way in which we understand who we are and how much we need to learn how to love one another. I share with you this very, very brief passage. When we cry, Abba, Father, then Paul goes on to say, it is that very Spirit bearing witness with our spirit that we are children of God. Now, be patient with me, because I want to share some not attractive news. And maybe it's news that you already know, but the Christian community over its nearly 2,000 years has not lived up to the call to be Christ-like. Indeed, it has demonstrated its inconsistency over and over again. And that's us. We claim to be Christians, followers of Jesus. And so that ancestry is our ancestry. And once in a while we discover that. Tyler, our grandson, while working on his master's degree, I may have told some of you and maybe all of you, but I want to say it again. Part of my history goes all the way back to a time when we were doing battle in Europe in the Second World War against the horrors of what was happening to Jewish people in particular, but to intellectuals and to people who were in opposition to the Third Reich and its behavior and its aggressive behavior toward other nations, and its aggressive nature toward those whom they saw as the other and therefore who deserved to die. I discovered that there was a young man who was part of my history. And his name, by the way, is a fascinating name because he is Paul, and he is also identified as August, and he is Teichmüller. Hedda, you spoke German. Did I do fairly well on that? When I discovered that, I quickly went to the internet and I said, I need to know something about this potential relative of mine. And while I discovered that he was brilliant, apparently, which gives me some degree of pride, he was a brilliant mathematician. He was so brilliant that there is a theory that has been used, and in Japan recently, a Japanese mathematician used that theory to both demonstrate its authenticity and its value in moving even beyond what Teichmüller was able to do. So look it up, Teichmüller theory in mathematics. Well, I also discovered other things. He was born in 1913, which was actually 8 years after my father was born. My dad was born in 1905. He was in Germany, August was. My father with his father, had immigrated in the late 1800s to the United States. And many of the Teichmuller family or Teichmuller family now lives not only in Wisconsin and Illinois and Iowa, but they live now in Texas and Arkansas and Arizona and a score of other places, including California. But the thing that I discovered that really stopped me to think deeply about the way in which I'm connected to the past, not only in terms of pride, but in a sense of remorse and sadness and grief. Teichmuller was raised to be a German Nazi youth. He was raised to hate Jews. He was raised to believe that all these other people were causing Germany such grief and grievance, and that indeed they needed to be eliminated. It was the ultimate solution, and he supported that. He not only supported it by joining the army, he became part of the military that invaded Holland and some of Eastern Europe. He was also a very bright student, got his PhD, taught coding to the military because he was so good at that, so that they could pass secret codes to one another. He also was asked to come back and teach again. And when he was in school, he remembered that there were Jewish mathematicians who were teaching non-Jewish students. And so he organized a protest in his university to get these two Jewish teachers who were teaching much more superior and much more pure and intelligent German students. And they lost their classes, one of whom then moved quickly to England and one who came to the United States. That was my family that did that. His unit that had gone to Holland had also been nearly wiped out, and so he decided to rejoin the unit, and ultimately died on September the 11th, 1943, 30 years old. 30 years old. And he's buried somewhere in Ukraine, of all places. So I began to wonder, how is it that we who are the children of God are so hostile and mean toward other children of God? Because one of the things that I've come to learn from other ministers who taught me and my experience in seminary and over the years as I've looked at the Bible, no one out there is not a child of God. I know that Paul spoke to the church, but it was Jesus said, there are others out there that I love and care for as well. It was John who said in his Bible, God so loved the world, not just Christians. God so loved the world, all of whom I understand, and I believe honestly that Jesus understood were likewise the children of God. Why have we done that? Why have we done so much harm to God's children? The church is blemished. The church has pockmarks all over its face of history for having behaved badly. And all of these folks, by the way, are part of God's church. For nearly 65 years now, I've been trying to think about why we simply haven't figured out how to care enough about one another as the 47,000 denominations within Christianity. 47,000 denominations within the movement of Jesus. I mean, he's got to be shedding tears like crazy. And there are more out there that have broken away from other churches because they weren't pure enough or inclusive enough or exclusive enough, or they interpreted something differently. That's us. That's our history as a Christian faith. And I would suggest, need to grieve that and mourn that, because it is a sign of, in a sense, our weakness and our inability to find ways to relate to one another. But by the way, we always spell Jesus the same way. I've said when we've gone to the Catholic Church and they welcome me, I said, you are our brothers and sisters over here. And they say, you are ours. And I said, do you spell Jesus differently than we do? Or God differently than we do? Or the Holy Spirit differently than we do? No. So what made us different? It made us. We made us different. 100 years of war fought between Lutherans and Catholics, Protestants of various persuasions, for over 100 years. Why? Why do we hate one another? Why do we not find a way to sit down gently and have a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, have a bagel, have something, and then just sit and visit with each other and listen to one another's thoughts and ideas? I don't know. Let's talk about children for a moment, and this is painful for me to even share. During a period of 10 seconds, another child under the age of 5 will die in the world. Another. We've just sat here and stood here for close to a half an hour or so, and we have lost at least 30 children in the world. 30 children, by the way, who might have, if we had paid more attention to their pain and their suffering and the way in which we do war on one another and the way in which we don't provide them what they need, they die. It is projected that there are somewhere between 3.9 million, that's an M, 3.9 million to 5.2 million children under the age of 5 die every year. And you want to know why? They die from malnutrition because they don't get enough food. And they don't get enough food because there's not enough food to feed them. They die as a result of disease, which comes because they're malnourished. In many cases, they're now extremely more subjected to disease. They die because they die as victims of bombing and war and hatred, and they die. And the chances of getting malnutrition and dying from a disease or dying from the wounds that they have increases 20 times as a result of being caught up in a war. That war could be between two nations, it could be between two religions, it could be between two ideas as to what the government ought to be. And so there's a rebellion and an uprising. And the most innocent people in war who end up dying are the children and the handicapped and the old. That's us. And as you think about it, those are your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren out there because they're part of our Holy Family. So I wonder, I'm constantly full of questions. Why do we do that to ourselves? When we know indeed that Jesus pulled little children to him, when others wanted to get them out of the way because they were irrelevant and unnecessary. And by the way, if you want to look at what David did when he was growing up as a military leader. David would go into a community with his rebellious army, and he would slaughter everybody. Everybody was slaughtered. I'm not making this up, folks. Go look at it in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy and all the stories that tell us about how David grew up. He didn't just wipe out Goliath, but he killed not only soldiers in that village, but he called all the men who were there who were not fighting him, and he killed all of the children, and he killed all of the women, including the women who were pregnant, and wiped out the whole village. And Saul, by the way, was really paranoid about how successful he was, because people began to sing songs about his valor and David's unique accomplishments. That's part of the Bible history too. I think it's time for us to remember that Jesus called us all to be peacemakers. And sometime as being peacemakers, we will get people angry at us because we're talking about things they don't agree with. And Jesus understood that. He was no Pollyanna about it. Oh, peacemakers are great. No, he remembered that the peacemakers who were prophesying in Israel were being killed. Those prophets were being killed. And no one, he said, respects a prophet from his own town, country, family. I want to share some very brief words from a novel written by Elie Wiesel. Elie Wiesel was hauled into, taken into, tortured in a concentration camp during and prior to the Second World War. He survived as a small child. He survived. And I've been reading more recently, again, a book that I had a number of years ago, and I wanted to read it again, and I discovered some incredible words in it. Elie Wiesel writes the story. It's in a book called The Gates of the Forest. And he's talking about the inhumanity of man, woman, of humans against humans, and the anxiety and the fear that humanity will destroy all the children and will have no future. And he then has this main character has a dream, and he's talking to another person, and they're hiding out in the forest, quite anxious that they too will be exterminated. And he says the Talmud, which tells us, says Gavil, that the Messiah sits waiting to be called at the gates of Rome amid beggars, cripples, and other outcasts. Now, immediately, I immediately think, oh, he means Jesus is one of those outcasts. Yes, he is. But who does he identify with, according to the Talmud? He identifies not with the powerful and the privileged, but he's sitting there with the beggars and the cripples and the other outcasts who are about to die. Then Gavil shares a dream he experienced during which he had a conversation with Elijah. Have you ever had a dream with Elijah? Now, Elijah was one of the major prophets of the Old Testament. He had this dream, and he had this conversation with him. And Gavil says, and he says to them, madmen, unconscious and conscious, madmen who are unaware of what they're doing, and madmen who know exactly what they're doing. He says to his companion, they indeed are preparing to kill them in cold blood. And then he says, I told him, Jewish children with dreams in their eyes, massacred in front of their speechless parents. That was what he understood would be happening and what was happening. Soon there will be none of them left. Our prophets will be dead children. Now, I know that when our children were born, I was arrogantly proud. And I told everybody that would want to listen to it, how incredible these babies were that Nancy and I had brought into the world. And when Tom was born, just the two of us were in the delivery room, and everybody else had left, and he was in that little warming thing. And I said to him, Tom, we're delighted to have you, and we're going to love you a lot for a long, long, long time in your life. And I suspect when I listen to you about your children and grandchildren, you love them too with a kind of depth and intensity that I too have felt. And on occasion, we've had children who come and join me when I sit on the steps, and I hope I can get back up. And they join me, and we have this wonderful thing. And one time, your granddaughter says, "That's my grandma." And you all found great joy in that. And Judith LaForest, when I saw the pictures of her with her grandchild, Simon, I thought to myself, oh man, that's what children need to receive always, as people who love them and care about them. And you know and I know that we have not treated children. In 1959, the United Nations said this was the year of declaring the rights of children. Rights of children? Did that include life? Yes. In 1979 and other times all through the history of the world, we've said children are valued and worth great, and yet we don't treat children as if they have that great value. And like Elie Wiesel, I think if we don't start thinking about the way in which we treat children, all of the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, all are precious in his sight, then we'll have no prophets. We'll have no teachers. We'll have no doctors. We'll have no farmers. We'll have no mechanics. We'll have no mathematicians. We'll have no, if we don't think about the way we care for our children. Because they too, when they're not cared for, oftentimes think of themselves as a zero, as a cipher in mathematics. And all of us want to have value. And when a person begins to feel they have no value, they strike out. I love life. And I love being in the life of the church. And I just deeply am fascinated by the words of Jesus and the words of others who have wanted to make the world better and whole and healthy. And I care greatly about you. And I urge you to join me as we begin to show over and over and over the depth of our love and compassion for the world in which we live, where there are so many others out there who are disregarded, disrespected, dishonored, and ignored. That's not Jesus. That's not our faith. We are called to live it. Amen. Now, there's a wonderful little hymn in the hymnal that tells us that we love to tell the stories, which is a children's song. And I want to share it because